What happens when someone has no friends? What if it's not because they choose to be alone, but because something deeper inside them is stopping them from connecting with anyone? You see them every day, walking through life, surrounded by people, yet always standing on the outside, looking in. At work, in class, at family gatherings. They're physically there, but emotionally, they seem to be miles away. Something about them feels distant, like they're hiding behind invisible walls built from years of disappointment, betrayal, or maybe even fear. But what could cause someone to shut themselves off from the world like that? What happens to a person when they stop trusting others, when they stop trying to connect? If you've ever wondered about this, or maybe you've felt it in your own life, then this story is for you. But before we dive deeper into it, take a second to subscribe. We're about to uncover some powerful truths about relationships, trust, and the things we often overlook. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this story unfolds, because understanding this could change the way you look at your friends, and maybe even change the way you see yourself. I've known him for years, but recently something started to change. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I thought maybe it was just stress, or perhaps something temporary. But over time, I realized it was more than that. We used to be so close. We'd meet up after work, grab coffee, talk about everything under the sun. Whether it was reminiscing about old college days, venting about work, or just talking about our favorite shows, those moments were ours. He was the kind of friend I could always rely on, whether I needed to laugh or just have a serious conversation. Time never seemed to matter. No matter how busy life got, we always found time for each other. He was the one person who always understood me, and I thought we'd always be there for each other. But then, slowly, those meetups started happening less and less. At first, I thought it was just his work schedule. He'd gotten busier, taking on more responsibility, getting promoted. I understood that. It makes sense that it would take up more of his time. But when I tried to make plans, a simple coffee, dinner after work, a weekend hangout, he'd always have an excuse. Sometimes he'd cancel last minute or suggest rescheduling, but that other time never seemed to come. The more I reached out, the more distant he became. And the more I tried, the more it felt like I was pushing against a wall. As time passed, I started to feel like I was losing touch with the person I thought I knew so well. The texts were shorter, the calls less frequent. It was like I was talking to a stranger, someone unfamiliar. It wasn't just the lack of time together. It was the way he spoke to me, the way he withdrew, the walls that seemed to rise between us, making it impossible to break through. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Maybe he was going through something personal, a rough patch, or maybe he was dealing with stress I didn't know about. I told myself it was temporary. Everyone goes through those times when they just need some space, right? Maybe he didn't want to burden me with whatever was weighing on him, but then the silence grew louder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried asking him what was going on, but each time he brushed me off. "I'm fine," he'd say, that same flat tone, as if everything was normal. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't fine. He wasn't anywhere near fine. The distance in his gaze spoke volumes, and I didn't know what to do with it. He was pulling away, retreating into himself, and I had no idea why. I felt like I was watching him slip away, and I couldn't stop it. I felt helpless. The more I tried to be there for him, the more he pushed me away. It was like every time I reached out, I hit a wall, and that wall kept getting higher and higher. I started to ask myself, what happened to the person I used to know? Was it something I did? Was it something I said? Or is it something deeper that I'll never fully understand? It wasn't just the changes in his behavior that troubled me. It was the silence, the quiet desperation I could feel in his distance. There were no arguments, no fights, just a growing chasm between us, filled with unanswered questions, unspoken words, and a sense of loss I couldn't shake. I was losing him, not just physically, but emotionally. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. As time went on, I couldn't ignore that gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't help but wonder if he was okay. I'd always known him to be strong, independent, someone who faced life head-on. But this person, this withdrawn, distant version of him, was someone I didn't recognize. I kept asking myself, had I missed the signs? Had I failed as a friend? The more I tried, the more he pulled away. And the more he pushed, the more I questioned myself. Had I done something wrong? Had something happened to him that I hadn't noticed? Or was it simply that he didn't want to be part of my life anymore? It was hard not to feel rejected, to feel like I wasn't enough for him anymore. It wasn't until one day when we were having lunch together at work that I began to understand just how deep this went. We were sitting in the break room, and I could tell that he wasn't really paying attention to what I was saying. Normally, we joke around, laugh, or discuss whatever was on our minds, but today, he just seemed distant. I asked him about his weekend, expecting the usual casual reply, but he barely responded. His eyes were somewhere far away, not focused on me or anything around us. It was like he wasn't even there. I had tried to ignore the signs before, but this time, something clicked. It wasn't just me. It was everyone. It wasn't just that he wasn't hanging out with me. He had stopped hanging out with everyone. He had become a ghost at work, rarely participating in office events, avoiding lunch with coworkers, and even skipping out on team meetings when he could. People used to laugh and joke with him. He was the life of the party, the guy everyone turned to for a good conversation. Now, he seemed to be shutting them out, one by one. Even his family was starting to notice. I heard from his sister that he had stopped answering calls from their parents, and when he did pick up, it was brief and cold. I could see the concern in her face when she talked about him. They all felt like they were losing him, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it anymore. Was I the last person left who was still trying to reach out to him, or was I just another person he was pushing away? It became clearer to me that it wasn't just about not wanting to hang out. It wasn't that he was just tired of spending time with me, or that he had a busy schedule. It was something deeper. It was like he was afraid of getting too close to anyone, of letting anyone back in. He wasn't just retreating from me, he was retreating from everyone. I could see it in his eyes every time I tried to talk to him. The walls were getting higher, and it was like he couldn't let them come down, even if he wanted to. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about anyone else. It was something inside him that was stopping him from letting people in. He didn't trust anyone, not even those who loved him. It was like he was so afraid of being hurt again that he didn't know how to reach out, even when he needed it the most. I could sense that fear, the fear of being vulnerable, of letting someone see the real him, and that scared me. The person I had known, the guy who could talk about anything, who could make a joke out of the hardest situations, was gone. In his place was a shadow, someone who felt trapped in his own mind, too scared to trust anyone, even the people who had always been there for him. I kept thinking, how did it get this far? What happened to the guy I used to know? Where was the friend I had laughed with, confided in, and built so many memories with? Then, one night, we were sitting at a bar. He was staring into his drink, his expression distant, as if lost in thought. After a long silence, he spoke up, his voice faltering slightly, as though the words were heavy, too heavy to say. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "I used to have a friend, a best friend, someone I trusted with everything. We were like brothers. But one day, everything just changed." There was a long pause. His voice shook as he continued. "He betrayed me, and not just in a small way. He went after everything I had. I trusted him with something so precious, and he destroyed it." I didn't know what to say, but I could feel the weight of his words. He clenched his fists tightly, visibly fighting the emotions. "We started a business together," he continued, his voice full of anger and hurt. "He came to me for help, asking me for a loan, a lot of money, and I trusted him. I gave him everything I had saved up, believing in the project, believing in him. We made plans together, talked about our future, about building something bigger. I never thought twice." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to gather his thoughts, but the pain in his eyes was evident. But after that, everything started falling apart. He started pulling away from me. The loan turned into a mountain of excuses. "I'll pay you back soon. Things are tight right now." And then he just stopped answering. It was like I didn't matter anymore. I could feel the frustration and betrayal in his words. "And that's not even the worst part," he said, his voice hardening. A few months later, I found out he was using the money for something else, for himself, to fund his own projects, his own life. He made deals behind my back without telling me. It was like he was building a life without me, using what was supposed to be our shared dream. I could see the tears welling in his eyes, but he fought them back. And then, I saw them together. I saw him with her, my ex, the one person I never thought he'd betray me with. the person I trusted him with more than anyone else in the world. His voice broke now, and I saw the deep hurt in his eyes. They were kissing, right in front of me. After everything, after all the time we spent together, after everything I gave him, he took the woman I loved. He took everything from me, not just my money, but my heart. And that's when I realized everything I thought I knew about him was a lie. Our friendship, my love, everything. I never really understood it until he said something that stuck with me. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to feel disappointed again. That was the moment it clicked. His isolation wasn't a choice. It wasn't that he didn't want to be alone, or that he didn't value the people in his life. It was his way of protecting himself. He'd been hurt so deeply by someone he trusted, someone he thought would never let him down, that he couldn't bring himself to trust anyone else again. He was scared. Scared that if he let someone close, if he opened up, the same thing would happen again. That fear had built walls around his heart, walls so thick that no one could get through. For the longest time, I didn't see it. I didn't understand why he was pushing everyone away. But now, it was clear. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about anyone else. It was about him and the pain he was carrying. At that moment, everything made sense. He wasn't pushing me away because he didn't care. He was pushing me away because he was scared. Scared to trust again. Scared to open up without feeling vulnerable. The person I once knew. The one who could talk about anything. The one who could laugh at the hardest situations. Had been replaced by someone hiding. Someone who was too afraid to feel anything. Too afraid to risk being hurt again. And that broke my heart. But it also made me realize how much he needed someone to see him. Not for the walls he'd built, but for the person he still was underneath. Sometimes we think people shut us out because they don't need us, or because they've lost interest in being close to us. But the truth is, the people who push others away are often the ones who need us the most. They just don't know how to ask for help. It's not that they don't care, it's that they're too afraid to care. They've been hurt so many times that it's easier to shut people out than to risk facing that pain again. But here's what we often miss. Silence isn't always rejection. When someone distances themselves, it doesn't always mean they're okay. It could be their way of crying out for help without knowing how to say it. It could be their way of hoping, in a quiet, unspoken way, that someone will notice the distance they've created and reach through it. In that moment, it all clicked for me. I knew I couldn't just walk away or give up on him, even though it felt like he was pushing me away. He was scared, yes, but he was also hurting. And when people are hurting, they don't always know how to let others in. They don't know how to ask for help without feeling vulnerable. And that's where we come in. If you know someone who seems distant, who keeps to themselves, don't take it personally. They might be hurting more than you realize. They might just need someone to understand that their silence isn't rejection. It's a cry for help. It's hard to see sometimes, especially when you're on the outside. But if you pay close attention, you'll start to notice the signs. The little things they do, the way they reach out in their own quiet way. Maybe it's in the way they look at you when they think you're not paying attention. Or maybe it's in the small, hesitant words they say when they talk about their life. It's in the vulnerability they hide behind their walls. So, don't give up on them. Don't assume that their distance means they don't care. The truth is, they probably care more than they're letting on. They just don't know how to let that care out, how to share it with the world. They don't know how to trust again. If we learn anything from this, it's that we shouldn't give up on people who seem to have no friends. Sometimes they just need time to heal. And if we're patient enough, we might just help them find their way back to trusting again. It's easy to walk away when things get tough. It's easy to take their distance personally, to assume they don't want us in their lives anymore. But if you stay, if you stick by them through the silence, through the walls they put up, you might just be the one who helps them see that it's okay to let people in again. And when they do, it will be worth everything. Because they'll know, when they finally open up, that someone was there all along, waiting patiently for them to heal.